How far can someone go to achieve freedom? An Irish woman named Anne Boony answered this question in a way that left me completely shocked. That's because this woman lived in the 18th century, when women were bound by the strict rules of society. But Anne simply ignored all that. She chose the seas. She dressed like a man, fought brutal battles, and became one of the most feared pirates in history. But hold on, that's not all. Her fate after being captured remains one of the greatest mysteries of piracy. Did she escape? Was she released? Or was her story erased forever? Believe me, just as I was surprised, you'll want to hear this to the end. This is the hidden story of Anne Boony. You know those childhood stories full of love and good examples? Well, Anne Boony had none of that. She was born around 1697 in Ireland and arrived in the world already surrounded by scandal. Her father, William Cormac, a respected lawyer, fell in love with a woman who wasn't his wife but his servant. The result? Scandal, shame, and a forced trip to the other side of the world. Their destination was Charleston, South Carolina, where her father rebuilt his life as a merchant, amassing considerable wealth. But money doesn't buy freedom, at least not the kind Anne wanted. From a young age, she showed an almost palpable restlessness. She couldn't stand the limitations imposed on women, let alone lectures about what was appropriate for a lady. Anne had a fiery temper. She was impulsive, stubborn, and, to many, unbearably arrogant. She didn't ask for permission, never apologized, and definitely didn't accept being treated as anything less than equal to the men around her. When she walked the streets, it was with her head held high and a firm gaze, as if daring the world to try and bring her down. And if they tried? Well, Anne had a knack for sarcasm, and if that didn't work, her fists did the rest. She wanted respect, not just any kind of respect, but to be seen as a force of nature, someone impossible to ignore. When she heard whispers behind her back about her attitude or insolence, Anne would just smile and move on, and don't think all this strength made her easy to get along with. Anne had a short fuse and almost comical impatience with anyone trying to give her orders. It's said that once, when a local merchant scolded her for speaking too loudly, Anne threw a glass at his head. After all, who was he to tell her how to behave? But there was a fascinating duality about her. To those who earned her trust, few, mind you, Anne was loyal, generous, and even protective. She had her own sense of justice and despised hypocrisy. If she liked you, she would defend you to the end. If she didn't, well, best to keep your distance. Still a teenager, rumors say Anne stabbed a man who tried to put her in her place during a party. Is it true? With Anne, anything seemed possible. When her father tried to shape her into the role of a proper society lady, offering wealthy suitors and a comfortable life, Anne resisted with all her might. She wanted something more, something beyond an arranged marriage and Charleston's predictable routine. She wanted adventure, freedom, and above all, she wanted to prove she could have the same opportunities as men. So when the chance came to escape that suffocating life, Anne didn't think twice. Legend has it that before fleeing, Anne burned down one of her father's plantations as a final act of rebellion. True or exaggerated, one thing was clear. The fire inside her was impossible to extinguish. That's when James Boony came into the picture, a cunning, smooth-talking sailor with a special talent for storytelling and for winning over rebellious hearts. To Anne, he was the embodiment of freedom, a man who didn't follow rules and seemed to have the world at his fingertips. Little did she know, James was more words than action. She ran away with him, trading her family's wealth for a life full of promises in the Bahamas. Anne wanted the seas, the storms, the adventures. She wanted to control her own destiny. But upon arriving in Nassau, the illusion quickly began to fade. James Boony wasn't the fearless pirate she imagined. Far from it. He worked as an informant for the British Crown, turning in other pirates for a few coins. Anne was immediately disgusted. She was with someone who represented everything she despised: betrayal, cowardice, blind obedience. Disillusioned, Anne began wandering Nassau alone, meeting real pirates, men and women who lived on the fringes of society and didn't care about rules. It was there, among smoky taverns and promises of hidden treasures, that Anne started to understand who she really was. She wanted more, and she knew that world was hers for the taking. It was in this environment that Anne met Jack Rackham, better known as Calico Jack, a charming, cunning, and, above all, free pirate. It was as if she had finally found someone who spoke her language. They understood each other instantly, and Anne saw in him an opportunity to leave behind a life without excitement. They say that one night, after a few drinks of rum, Anne looked at Jack and said, "You're the first man who really seems to be living." And so, without looking back, Anne Bonny left James and embarked on a new journey, one that would make her a legend. If there was one thing Anne Bonny admired, it was boldness. And no one in the Caribbean seemed bolder than Jack Rackham, the infamous Calico Jack. He wasn't just any pirate. Jack had style, charm, and, above all, an almost theatrical talent for the life of crime. Their meeting took place in a noisy tavern in Nassau, surrounded by the smell of cheap rum and tobacco. Jack walked in like he owned the place, and, in a way, he did. People automatically made space for him. He wore his extravagant, colorful calico clothes, hence the nickname, carried an easy laugh, and had a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Anne watched him from a distance, her gaze a mix of curiosity and disdain. After all, she wasn't easily impressed. Jack approached, leaning on her table with a sly smile. "They say you have more courage than most men around here," he said, leaning in as if about to share a secret. Anne raised an eyebrow, keeping her defiant tone. "And they say you have more talk than talent." The crew around them burst into laughter, but Jack just smiled. There was something about her, something different from any other woman he had met, and Anne, in turn, saw in him an opportunity. Her husband, James Bonny, was a cowardly opportunist, and Jack promised something far more exciting. He raised his glass in a toast to courage and freedom. "I hope you have the stomach for both." Without hesitation, Anne toasted with him. Soon after, they were sailing together, ready to carve their names into the history books. Being a woman in the world of piracy was a death sentence. A pirate. Ship's deck was no place for fragility or hesitation, and Anne knew it. To secure her spot, she adopted a simple yet effective strategy: pretending to be a man. Dressed in loose pants, a worn leather coat, and a scarf tied around her head, she blended in with the crew without drawing attention. But the real test came with the first battle. A Spanish merchant ship appeared on the horizon, and Jack's crew prepared for the attack. Anne gripped her pistol tightly, feeling her heart race. Jack watched her from afar, evaluating if she was all talk. "Are you scared, boy?" one of the sailors teased, laughing at Anne's silence. Anne responded without hesitation, pointing her pistol directly at the man. "The only thing that scares me is seeing your face up close for another second." Jack laughed, pleased. And when the fight began, Anne didn't hold back. With precise sword strikes and accurate shots, she proved to be braver than many of the men there. After the victory, Jack walked up to Anne and patted her shoulder. "If I'd known you were that good at fighting, I'd have brought you along sooner." She just smiled, wiping the blood off her blade. "You haven't seen anything yet." From that day on, Anne no longer needed disguises to earn respect. She had claimed her place. The legend of Anne Bonny and Calico Jack grew with every ship they plundered. But everything changed when another fierce figure entered the scene. Mary Read, another female pirate who hid her identity among the sailors. I've even made a video detailing Mary Read's incredible story. If you haven't seen it yet, you can check it out in the description of this video. When Anne and Mary met, something curious happened. One drunken night, Mary, still disguised as a man, tried to impress Anne with her battle stories. Anne, who already suspected something, smirked. "You talk like a man, but you fight like a woman," she said, throwing a knife onto the table, embedding it into the wood with precision. Mary froze for a moment and then laughed. "And you talk like a woman, but fight like a demon." Their friendship grew quickly, and before long, the Wihadai two were leading brutal attacks on merchant ships. Survivors of the Sea Demon's attacks told terrifying stories, claiming they were more feared than Jack Rackham's own men. Their fame spread across the oceans, while the British Royal Navy began to see them as a real threat. Jack might have been the official leader, but it was Anne and Mary who commanded the fear among their enemies. It's said that in one of their boldest attacks, Anne and Mary led the capture of a ship alone, while the male crew hesitated. Their courage inspired both terror and respect in equal measure. Anne Bonny thought she had seen it all in the world of piracy, but Mary Red was different. When they crossed paths on Calico Jack's ship, Anne noticed something peculiar about this thin and reserved figure. Mary wasn't like the other men. Her movements were more controlled, her speech more calculated. One night, as the ship gently swayed under the moonlight, Anne approached Mary, suspicious. "You fight too well to be just another one of these idiot men," Anne said, narrowing. Her eyes, Mary looked up, assessing Anne. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then, with a half-smile, Mary finally revealed the truth. "And you fight too well to be just a woman," Mary retorted, raising her glass of rum in a toast. From that moment on, a partnership was born that would terrorize the seas. 2 women, hidden among criminals, yet feared even by the most experienced sailors. Enemies who crossed paths with the duo quickly realized they had underestimated the women pirates. During attacks, Anne and Mary moved across the deck like storms, coordinated and lethal. In an ambush on a French merchant ship, one of the captured officers was stunned to realize that 2 of the fiercest pirates were, in fact, women. With his hands tied behind his back, he whispered, This must be the devil's trick." Anne laughed, wiping her sword blade on the man's coat. "No, sweetheart, this here is pure skill." Mary, beside her, spun her pistol calmly. And a little patience. Their fame spread quickly, and soon stories circulated about the skirted beasts who attacked mercilessly, dressed as men and fighting like demons. Many sailors claimed they would rather face any pirate than fall into the hands of Anne Boony and Mary Read. They said their fate would be worse than death itself. In a world dominated by men, Anne and Mary broke barriers and defied all social conventions. It wasn't just about fighting and stealing, it was about challenging a system that saw them as mere decorative figures. Their names became etched in history as symbols of resistance and courage. But behind the fame, there was a constant weight. Anne knew that if they were captured, they wouldn't have the same luck as the men. There would be no ransom, no mercy. "Do you know what they say about us?" Mary once asked while staring at the sea. Anne smirked. "That we're monsters," Mary shook her head. "That we're legends." And indeed they were. More than just looters, they were pioneers of something greater. Women who refused to live under the rules of a world that didn't want them there. Some historians believe that Anne and Mary inspired other women who dared to take to the seas, assuming false identities to claim their freedom. I've always wondered what went through the minds of their victims when they saw Calico Jack's sails on the horizon. It must have been a mix of despair and disbelief. After all, who would expect that among the brutal pirates emerging out of nowhere were 2 women, armed and ready for combat? Anne and Mary weren't there to play around. When they boarded a merchant ship, there was no mercy. Anne, with her natural impatience, was always the first to jump onto the enemy deck, sword in hand, and a look that could freeze even the bravest. Mary, on the other hand, was more methodical, a strategist, always keeping a close eye on the frightened sailors' movements. There's a legendary story from one of their raids. During the plundering of a Spanish ship loaded with fabrics and spices, Anne allegedly grabbed the captain by the collar and, without hesitation, pressed her blade to his throat. "Hand over everything of value, or I'll decorate this deck with your blood, darling," and he handed it over. They always did. The plundering brought a true fortune to Calico Jack's crew. Gold, jewels, rum. But according to accounts, Anne always preferred weapons over riches. "Real treasure," she'd say, "is a loaded pistol and a sharp blade." Of course, a reign of terror like this doesn't go unnoticed for long. The Royal Navy began hunting them with an obsession that bordered on desperation. And honestly, who could blame them? Calico Jack and his crew were humiliating the naval forces of powerful empires, looting and disappearing like ghosts. Anne and Mary's crew had already escaped several ambushes, but the noose was tightening. The British warships, faster and better equipped, were everywhere, patrolling the seas in search of the infamous pirates. The problem? Jack was arrogant. He believed they could keep running forever. But Anne wasn't so optimistic. According to some accounts, one night she warned Jack while gazing at the moonlit sea. "You can't run forever, Jack. The tide always changes." But Jack didn't listen. He never did. The final showdown happened on a stormy night near Jamaica. The British sailors caught them off guard, and it was pure chaos. Screams, gunfire, swords clashing on the rain-soaked deck. Anne and Mary fought like demons, resisting until the end, while most of them cowered below, deck in fear. It's said that Anne and Mary called the cowardly men bilge rats for hiding instead of fighting. And honestly, I don't doubt it one bit. After years of defying the seas and escaping the clutches of the law, fate finally caught up with them. Anne Boony and Calico Jack's crew were captured in a Royal Navy ambush in 1720. The ship was surrounded at night when most of the pirates were too drunk to react. Anne and Mary, on the other hand, were the only ones who put up a fight, battling fiercely until they were overpowered. The capture of the ship was swift and brutal. When the English Navy surrounded the vessel, most of the pirates were unconscious, drunk after a night of celebration. Anne and Mary, however, grabbed their swords and pistols and fought to the last moment. But alone, they stood no chance. During the trial, the court was determined to make an example out of Calico Jack's crew. The men's fate was sealed quickly, execution by hanging. Anne, however, remained defiant before the judges. When asked about her partner, she fired back without hesitation. If he had fought like a man, he wouldn't be dying like a dog. Anne's words echoed through the courtroom, causing murmurs among the crowd. However, her verdict seemed inevitable. Death by hanging. When Anne Boony announced that she was pregnant, the court fell silent. Under the law at the time, pregnant women couldn't be executed until after childbirth. This meant her sentence was postponed, at least for the time being, and that's how Anne escaped the gallows. The question was, what would happen after? The baby was born. Rumors spread that her influential father in the colonies might pay for her freedom. Others believed she had her own plans to escape prison before it was too late. Mary Read, her loyal companion, tried the same argument to delay her execution, but fate had other plans. Gravely ill, Mary died in prison shortly after, leaving Anne alone to face an uncertain future. This is where Anne Boony's story turns into legend. Some believe she managed to escape prison with the help of influential friends and lived the rest of her life under a new identity. Another theory suggests that she returned to the sea, assuming another name and continuing her adventures far from the British Crown's watchful eye. Official records state that Anne Boony was never executed, but her name also disappears from historical documents after her imprisonment. Could this be a sign that she truly managed to vanish and start over? To this day, researchers try to uncover Anne Boony's whereabouts after her capture, but no theory has been confirmed. The truth, no one really knows. Anne Boony's fate remains shrouded in mystery, and perhaps that's exactly what keeps her legend alive today. Anne Boony wasn't just any pirate. She became an icon, a symbol of rebellion, courage, and resilience in a male-dominated world. Even centuries later, her story continues to fascinate people around the world, appearing in books, movies, and even inspiring fictional characters. From her time to the present day, Anne Boony is seen as an example of defying social norms. Her figure has inspired countless cultural productions, from historical novels to TV series that depict the golden age of piracy. Have you heard of the character Anne Boony from Assassin's Creed 4: Black Flag? That's right. This legendary pirate served as inspiration for that and many other media representations. She appears in paintings, plays, and even has statues erected in her honor. But what's most interesting is how her story is often romanticized, forgetting that Anne was also a criminal, and relentless looter who lived dangerously until the end. But is everything we know about Anne Boony true? Or has history been exaggerated over the years? Some historians claim that many of the tales about her life were embellished to create a more epic and exciting narrative. After all, who doesn't love a good pirate story full of adventure and twists? I sure do. On the other hand, historical documents confirm that Anne was indeed involved in bold attacks and faced British justice with admirable courage. She was, without a doubt, a woman ahead of her time. Researching historical records, I realized that they indicate Anne Boony was one of the few officially recognized female pirates, which contributed to the fascination surrounding her figure. I truly believe Anne Boony is remembered not just for her daring feats at sea, but for what she represents. A woman who defied the rules and lived by her own laws. Even centuries later, her name still sparks curiosity and admiration. Sometimes, I find myself thinking, isn't it fascinating how Anne Boony's story transcends generations? Perhaps it's because she embodies something we all, at some point, desire: total freedom. She refused to conform to the role society expected of an 18th century woman. Instead of resigning herself to a mundane life, she chose to sail the oceans, plunder ships, and fight alongside the most feared men of her time. And it's not just that. Anne Boony became a symbol of female resistance. She refused to be a supporting character in a story dominated by men and proved that she was just as, if not more, fearless than any pirate of her era. But what if Anne Boony had been born in another time? Would she have been a successful executive, a political leader, or would she still have chosen the sea as her home? Well, Anne Bonny's life teaches us that sometimes breaking away from expectations is necessary to truly live. Of course, I'm not suggesting we go out plundering ships, but her determination and boldness are inspiring. She reminds us that we don't always have to follow the path others have set for us. The courage to be authentic can take us to unimaginable places. The greatest obstacles are often within ourselves. Many historians believe that Anne Bonny, with her ability to manipulate and inspire people, could have been a powerful political leader if she had been born in another era. And the most fascinating part, no one knows exactly what happened to Anne after her imprisonment. Did she really abandon the pirate life, or did she find a way to return to the seas under a new identity? This mystery only adds to the allure of her story. This story proved that freedom comes at a price, and to achieve our dreams, we must take risks. Maybe that's why Anne's story still resonates so strongly today. And you, what's your ocean to conquer? Leave your thoughts in the comments about Anne Bonny's incredible journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't leave just yet. Here's the story of Mary Red, another legendary woman of the seas that will shock you. Click and keep exploring the mysteries of the ocean. A big hug, and see you in the next sea story.